There's a saying that if you shoot for the stars, you'll land on the moon. Meaning if you try for something really, really, really lofty, worst case scenario, you'll settle for something really, really good. You set your sights very far, and at least you get a pretty good reward. That's an old an old saying. But the ruling elites of our culture here in the United States and a lot of places in the world is teach your modern day slaves to shoot for being a slightly better dressed slave. If that's their goal, worst case scenario, you'll have better dressed slaves. We have a culture that idealizes self destruction, many forms of self destruction. Three recent examples of that, recent culturally speaking, one of them is a couple decades old. But we have Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, we have Whitney Houston, and Junior Seau. Each of them were self destructive, and each of them were entirely worshipped by certain segments of society. First, Kurt Cobain, he was from a year or a decade or two ago now. It's been a long while. But Kurt Cobain, at the time, he revolutionized music. He and Nirvana revolutionized music, and he was so amazing in counterculture, and he didn't like the mindlessness of music, yada, yada, yada. Then he killed himself. And plenty of people couldn't see that happening. They thought that someone killed him, it was a setup, all this, because they couldn't imagine somebody that had so much going for them. Well, for one thing, when you have money, one of the things it does is it gives you time to think. And more or less, based on Kurt Cobain's suicide note, which you can find online, he had enough time to think about how, as counterculture as he wanted to be, eventually that counterculture became the popular culture, and he was entirely miserable to see so many self-righteous, self-loathing idiots worshiping him. And so there's no amount of fame that can make you escape once you have that amount of introspection where you're thinking, whoa, my life is making people empty, just in a different direction. With that in mind, Maynard from Tool and Perfect Circle, I like the bands, but he should be pretty suicidal right now too, because those bands, like the Bible says, by their fruits you will know them, and the fruits, the fans of Tool and Perfect Circle, absolutely the kind of people that should make someone, if Maynard is as introspective as he seems, he should be pretty suicidal right now because his fans are pretty crappy. But that's Kurt Cobain. He was entirely famous, hugely famous, still famous, hugely famous during his lifetime, and entirely self-destructive, which is something the culture rewards. The ruling elites reward those the self-destructive celebrities, but also they reward those obedient little cogs who hope, best case scenario, maybe one day I could be the next Kurt Cobain, the next self-destructive, slightly better dressed slave, or slightly worse dressed slave if you're Kurt Cobain. Then we'll go to Junior Seau. Junior Seau was a hugely famous football player, played for the Chargers here in San Diego, and he recently killed himself. He killed himself this week, actually. And just like with Kurt Cobain, plenty of people saying, "Oh, like, how could you possibly want to kill yourself? You're Junior Seau. He was so famous, so good. He was, and all these newspaper things are coming out. He was fans and teammates and coaches alike talk about how Junior Seau was a leader, both on and off the field, and he was always this, always that. They're bullshitting, 100%. Simply, they could say, you know how empty it makes you eventually in life when you get made into a celebrity, a celebrated person for knocking people down and trying to keep people from knocking another person down? No matter how famous professional sports are or become, look at how mindless and idiotic they are. Football, getting paid to knock people over or stop someone from knocking over. Basketball, getting paid to bounce a ball and try to put it in a hole. I mean, these are cool things. I like them both. I like to play them. But to worship people because they knock someone down, well, you can do everything, whatever you want. You can create a culture where those are celebrities, modern day gladiators and whatnot. But the people are going to be miserable as hell. Junior Seau is a great example because he wasn't just a great football player. He was involved in a whole lot of humanitarian this, humanitarian that. But the fact is, he was a self-destructive person. Anybody who's that big, that strong, and they just think, you know what? I'll just overpower all my obstacles. No. There's always going to be, the saying goes, there's always going to be someone bigger and stronger than you, so you have to learn to adapt. But people that become that big and that strong, they really get in their mind, well, I'll just knock through any obstacle, and eventually you can't. He's kind of like a hot chick. Junior Seau is like a hot chick, and that hot chicks are told when they're young they can just do whatever they want because they're a hot chick. He was been told all through being a football player. He died at like 40 something, early 40s. So in his 20s and 30s, prime of his life, he was being told, no, no, you'll always be able to just power through whatever. And eventually that doesn't work. Disillusion sets in, just like it sets in for the attractive woman once she's not attractive enough. Disillusion set in for Junior Seau when he wasn't strong enough to bust through some obstacle in his life. And he was rendered emotionally retarded because he relied too much on strength and whatnot. And he became suicidal. An interesting side note, a lot of people talk about, there's like Tim Duncan, for example, he's a basketball player, he stayed in college rather than jumping right to the pros like he could. Plenty of people have seen college basketball players go from skip college and go right into skip a couple of years, and then it became fashionable for some to go right from high school into the pros. And a lot of people, particularly parents, would be telling them that's a bad idea. You should get your education. And so many people are thinking, "What do you need education for, dude? You've made it. You're a success. You're going to get paid millions of dollars to bounce a ball and wander around and try to keep people from making it into the reason you need an education is to be able to contextualize life more so than just, no, if you're strong enough and you're fast enough and you bounce a ball good enough, you'll be a success in life. That you'll be a failure. You will eventually be as close to suicidal as you can be, and possibly downright suicidal, as in the case of Junior Seau. So again, Junior Seau hugely rewarded. I mean, Kurt Cobain and Junior Seau hugely rewarded for being self-destructive. Kurt Cobain just wailed and moaned about stuff, and then eventually became completely consumed by his wailing and moaning, killed himself. Junior Seau just knocking stuff over his whole life. I'll just knock it down, I'll knock it down, I'll knock it down. And eventually become addicted to the easy answer of, well, just overpower with your brute size or your overwhelming personality. And eventually then you can't. Self-destruction gets hugely rewarded in this culture. And see, those two suicides, it's interesting to note, because the last thing we got is Whitney Houston, and of course that's not really a suicide. But those two suicides, those men in this culture, in the United States, are when boys and girls are growing up, they're equally likely to commit suicide. As soon as a boy reaches 13 or 14, when gender roles become apparent, boy is 4 times more likely than a woman to commit suicide, and is 26 times more likely. And by the time he reaches old age, 13.5 times more likely to commit suicide. That's self-destructive behavior. Now, speaking of self-destructive behavior, although Whitney Houston wasn't a suicide technically, she was a self-worshipping drug addict. She killed herself earlier than she needed to be. That was a form of suicide, that kind of self-destructive behavior. So although those suicide statistics where men kill themselves, like just outright kill themselves more often, yeah, but women are taught to absolutely be self-destructive, but in a different way. They're taught to live longer, live more comfortably and whatnot. But when you talk about self-destruction, the real fundamental self-destruction is a self-destruction, a living death. Women are taught to live a living death. Men are taught to burn out and die. Women are taught to just fade away in a living death. And so you have this self-worshipping drug addict. And just like with all the Junior Seau fans and everything being like, oh, he was so amazing and whatnot, let's focus on the good. How about you focus on the fact that none of that nonsense, none of that congratulations and football fame kept him from wanting to die. Likewise, for Whitney Houston fans, none of this whole, she was so beautiful, let's put her in a picture and have angel wings on her. She would rather be high than amongst you. She would rather be escaping reality through drugs to the point of death than be around the atmosphere that she helped create. The celebrity atmosphere, garbage. No one's happy with it. So that's the real self-destruction that is offered to you by ruling elites and by just middle management of the culture, wasting your potential. Again, men do a lot of times just physically. They are crushed emotionally, they accept it, and then they waste away physically doing things like football or the military, things that destroy your body. Women do things that destroy their body too, but more they do things that destroy their mind. Let's focus on men first. Men love things like being a cop, being military. The suicide rate for these huge. But meanwhile, while there's a handful of men wasting their lives away, like the Michael Jacksons of the world, Usher, Justin Bieber, wasting their life away being part of this petty, fake ass celebrity world, so many girls are taught to be that. So many girls are taught to be this self worshipping social drug addict like Whitney Houston. She was just an outright drug addict, but so many girls taught to be social drug addicts. Because to be a celebrity, you either have to do something, men typically have to do something, or you have to be someone. An attractive woman can be a celebrity, call it genetic celebrity. And so the ultimate self-destruction of women in our culture that's encouraged hugely is the self-destruction of wasting away your potential on accepting genetic celebrity and never developing a character. And then eventually being disillusioned as hell because no one told you. They kind of told you, but no one really got through to you the fact that you are going to get older, you are going to get uglier. And so you're not going to be an attractive young woman forever. You will not be a genetic celebrity forever. But like with Junior Seau or Kurt Cobain, if that's all you know, it's like, no, I make my millions by whining about culture. Kurt Cobain, or I make my millions by knocking people over. Eventually you can't do that. Eventually you'll have to contextualize the world in a different way. Likewise, so like them, the young attractive women who are taught to absolutely be self-destructive and destroy their potential to be anything but attractive, eventually they can't be attractive. That's why God invented all the crazy plastic surgery and everything. Look, I look, people tell me that I only look like I'm insert number that they think is low. No, really, I'm 50. Can you believe it? That is a living death. This is the self-destruction that is encouraged by our culture. So in the end, men and women, just everyone, it's hugely encouraged in this culture to be self-destructive. Because again, you aim for the stars, you'll land on the moon. I mean, that's thinking big. But if you think, man, I wish I could be a slightly better dressed slave. I wish I could get paid to sing songs or to bounce a ball or to have my drug addiction front page news. If that's your goal, you're a very manageable slave. And in the end, the people, every one of these celebrities, every single one of them, and all their fans, miserable people. They've learned to smile and they've learned to talk in such a way that would have you fooled. They are miserable as hell. Every one of them just, the poor people live paycheck to paycheck. These celebrities are like social high, from one social high to the next, just so close to social suicide and even downright real suicide. And it's simply because we have such a rotten culture in a lot of ways that these people, they want to build up all this social energy so they can be tyrants, because if people accept you being a tyrant, then they'll never be mean to you. And really, people just want to be left alone. They just want to be able to be, if not cared about, at least left alone. But really it boils down to wanting to be cared about, and you think, well, if people are going to put up and tolerate and even celebrate me for being a drug addicted ball bouncer or something like that, then they'll leave me alone if I just want to be cool and normal. But it gets pretty addictive. Once you're in the spotlight of the poisonous, self-destructive celebrity, it's hard to just steer it and go, okay, now I'm going to be healthy and normal. Why would you do that? Because that's not what these pawns, these worshipers of the disgusting celebrity, they don't worship that. You'd be obsolete in a second. We'll look at Fiona Apple's speech at the MTV Movie Awards or the Music Awards. And Fiona Apple, she told off the whole celebrity culture, and she's pretty much in oblivion now. She's heard of, but she gave it away. And that was nothing. The system can eat up people like that. And so if you actually want to be what you think celebrities are, which is happy, carefree, etc., you got to ignore celebrities, and you got to not play into it. You got to not buy into the self-destructive culture. Men got to stop hoping that they get to be the one who gets paid millions to knock people over or to brag about yourselves. Speaking of rappers now, paid millions of dollars to brag and talk about your feelings, some Justin Bieber garbage. And women, man, I'm telling you, to women, it's enough to say when you look at Kurt Cobain and people, the fans saying, would he possibly want to die? He had everything. He had nothing. Junior Seau, he had everything. Oh man, Super Bowls and all this kind. He had nothing. According to him, when we're talking about their internal, what they value, they had nothing. And Whitney Houston, although she didn't technically commit suicide, she would rather be out of this world, out of her mind, than a part of the celebrity culture that she was welcomed into. So, lastly, to the girls, and it applies to the guys too, at some point you're going to realize that if you keep thinking, well, if I was as good looking as this person, or as successful, for guys and for girls, if I was as successful as this person, if I was as successful, if I was as strong as Junior Seau, then I'd be happy. If I was as talented, that's my girl voice, if I was as talented as and beautiful and talented as Whitney Houston, I'd be happy. It will never happen. There's not some level, once you reach it, you're going to be happy if you're buying into celebrity culture. You could be as big as Junior Seau and be depressed as hell, suicidal because of this rotten ass culture. You can be as lovely and talented as Whitney Houston, you'll be depressed as hell. So we have a self-destructive culture. You play into it, you're going to get sucked into it. You're not going to be strong enough. You're not going to be pretty enough. It's all going to fall apart.